At 2:07 in the morning, my son's wife unlocked my front door for the 37th time. She didn't rush. That's what still bothers me. Most people breaking into a house hesitate, even for a second. They listen for movement, they flinch at every sound, their bodies give them away. She didn't do any of that. The lock clicked, the door opened slowly, and she stepped inside like she was coming home. I was sitting in the dark when she entered. Didn't move, didn't breathe loud, didn't reach for the lamp. I just listened to her feet on my floor. She slipped her shoes off immediately, placing them neatly by the door. She always did that. She respected the floors. She just didn't respect the man who paid for them. Before you assume this was about theft, let me stop you. She never took a television, never stole jewelry, never touched the cash I kept in a drawer for emergencies. What she took was something far more valuable: control. And the first time she did it, I didn't even know it was happening. That should scare you, because if you don't know when your life stops being yours, someone else already decided it for you. I'm not a dramatic man. I've been called many things in my life, but emotional isn't one of them. I spent decades working jobs where panic got people hurt. You learn to stay calm. You learn to observe. And observation is what saved me. At the time, I was living alone in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where people wave but don't ask questions, where routines matter more than excitement. Morning walks, volunteering a few days a week, gardening in the afternoon, church on Sundays, football on TV when the knees wouldn't cooperate. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. Then my son married her. From the start, she watched me differently than everyone else did, not with concern, with interest. She asked questions that didn't match her smile. How often do you forget things? Do you ever lose track of time? Have you thought about simplifying your life? She said it softly, kindly, like she was helping. That's how predators survive in polite society. They sound reasonable. The first sign something was wrong came one afternoon when I opened a drawer in my bedroom. Nothing was missing. That's the part most people don't understand. Everything was there, just not how I left it. Papers reordered, folders slightly off, as if someone had tried very hard to make it look untouched without knowing the order mattered. I told myself I was imagining it. The second sign was my mail, opened, resealed, returned neatly to the stack. The third was a framed photo on my dresser, turned just enough that I noticed, but not enough to be obvious. Tiny changes, surgical changes. Someone testing whether I trusted my own memory. That's when I realized something important. She wasn't trying to scare me. She was trying to confuse me. If that doesn't make your stomach tighten, it should, because confusion is the first step toward taking someone's voice. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not my neighbors, not my church friends, not even my son. I needed to be sure, so I installed cameras. Quietly. I didn't announce it, I didn't warn anyone, I didn't even tell myself what I expected to find. I just waited. The first time I saw her on the footage, I felt something colder than anger. She unlocked my door with a key I never gave her. No hesitation, no pause, no fear. She walked straight into my bedroom, sat on the edge of my bed, and scrolled through her phone like she was killing time. She laughed at something. That laugh didn't belong in my house. Over the next 3 months, I watched her enter my home 36 times. Late nights, early afternoons, rainy days, sunny ones. She photographed documents, opened drawers, moved things just enough to make me doubt myself. And once, just once, she stood in my living room, looked straight into the camera, and waved. Not a friendly wave, a confident one. If you're still watching right now, ask yourself something honestly. Would you have confronted her? Or would you have started doubting your own sanity too? Because that's the trap she was setting. I confronted her on a quiet afternoon. I didn't raise my voice, didn't accuse, didn't threaten. I showed her the footage, every entry, every timestamp, every room. She watched calmly, almost bored. Then she smiled and said, "You're being dramatic." She leaned back in her chair like this was an inconvenience, not a crime. Then she said the sentence that made my blood go cold. "Honestly, I think you're imagining half of this. Have you talked to a doctor lately?" That's when the real plot revealed itself. She wasn't stealing from me. She was rewriting me. If she could convince people I was forgetful, confused, unstable, then it wouldn't matter what I said later. Nobody listens to the confused old man. That was her advantage, and for a moment, she had it. Some people watching this will say I should have called the police immediately. Others will say I should have warned my son. But here's the real question, and I want you to think about it before we go any further. What would you do if the person undermining you was quietly convincing everyone you couldn't be trusted anymore? Because once that story sticks, evidence doesn't save you. Silence does. I didn't argue with her. I didn't defend myself. I went home, packed a bag, and left without telling anyone where I was going. No note, no explanation, no forwarding address. I wanted her to think she'd won. I wanted her comfortable, because people who feel safe make mistakes. If this part unsettles you, stay with me. Stories like this don't come with warnings, and they don't end the way you expect. 1 week later, at 2:07 in the morning, she came back. Same door, same key. But this time, I wasn't confused. I wasn't gone, and I wasn't alone. And what she did next exposed something even worse than breaking into my house. If this story makes you uneasy, subscribe. Most people never see this coming. When I left my house, I didn't disappear by accident. I did it on purpose. No forwarding address, no calls, no explanations. I wanted to see what she would do when she thought the obstacle was gone. Because here's something you learn when you've lived long enough. People reveal their true intentions when they think no one is watching. I stayed in a small rented room a few towns over. Nothing fancy, just a bed, a chair, and silence. The kind of silence that lets your thoughts catch up to you, whether you like it or not. For the first 2 nights, I slept poorly. Not from fear, but from insult. There's a difference. Fear makes you alert. Insult makes you replay moments over and over, wondering how someone decided you were disposable. By the 3rd night, I stopped wondering, because that's when the calls started coming in. Not to me, about me. It began with a voicemail from a woman I'd volunteered with for years. Her voice was cautious, careful. "Just checking in," she said. "Your son mentioned you've been having a rough time lately." That pause before rough time told me everything. The next call was from a neighbor, then someone from church. Same tone, same careful phrasing. No one asked where I was, they asked if I was okay. That's when it clicked. She wasn't just breaking into my house, she was breaking into my reputation. I found out later how she did it. She didn't accuse me outright, that would have raised questions. She planted concern. She told people she was worried, that she'd noticed changes, that she wasn't sure how to help someone who didn't realize they needed it. She said she found doors unlocked, papers scattered, appliances left on. None of it was true. But lies don't need to be true. They just need to sound plausible. And nothing sounds more plausible than decline, especially when it comes wrapped in sympathy. If you've ever watched someone's credibility erode in real time, you know how fast it happens. One raised eyebrow, one hushed conversation, one concerned look exchanged when you're not in the room. By the time you realize what's happening, people have already decided who you are. And she was deciding it for me. Here's the part that still turns my stomach. She wasn't doing this in secret. She was doing it openly, comfortably. She told my son I'd been forgetful lately. She told others I was confused about small things. She even suggested, casually, that maybe I shouldn't be living alone anymore. Always gently, always with concern, never with evidence. If you're watching this and thinking, surely someone would have questioned her, you're wrong. People trust confidence, and she had plenty of it. I didn't confront her again. That would have played right into her hands. Instead, I did something she didn't expect. I listened. I listened to voicemails. I read messages forwarded to me quietly by people who weren't sure what to believe. I took notes. And then I noticed something strange. The language she used was specific. Too specific. She didn't say I was sick. She didn't say I was unstable. She said I was confused, forgetful. Not unsafe yet, but getting there. That word again, yet. It wasn't concern, it was preparation. That's when I realized she wasn't freelancing this. Nobody executes a narrative this cleanly without knowing the rules. She knew exactly what words to use, exactly what not to say, exactly how to avoid triggering resistance. Which meant one thing. She'd done this before. Not to me, to someone else. That realization changed everything, because now this wasn't personal, it was procedural. I started making quiet calls of my own, not accusatory ones, curious ones. I asked questions the way she did, softly, politely, with concern. And slowly, patterns emerged. Similar stories, similar phrasing, different towns. Always an older person, always someone living alone, always someone whose independence made them inconvenient. I didn't have proof yet, but I had something better. Consistency. If you're still here right now, let me ask you something, and be honest. If someone slowly convinced the world you couldn't be trusted anymore, how long do you think it would take before your own voice stopped mattering? That's not a hypothetical, that's a strategy. Meanwhile, she kept entering my house. 37th time. 38th. She acted bolder now, longer visits, less care. She assumed I was gone for good. And she wasn't wrong about one thing. The man who lived there before was gone. But what replaced him was far more dangerous. Because while she was busy managing the story of who I was documenting the story of who she really was. If this feels uncomfortable, good, subscribe. Most people don't realize how quietly control changes hands. The night she broke in again, she stayed longer than usual. She went through my bedroom, my files, my desk. She made a call while she was inside. I couldn't hear the other voice clearly, but I heard enough. "No, he's not around anymore," she said casually. "Yes, I'm handling it." Handling it. Like I was paperwork. That was the moment I stopped feeling insulted and started feeling patient. Because patience is what you need when someone is already walking into their own consequences. She thought she was erasing me. What she didn't realize was that she was leaving a trail so clean, so consistent, and so arrogant, it could only end one way. And the next move wasn't hers. It was mine. She didn't know it yet, but the next time she entered my house, she wouldn't be collecting evidence anymore. She'd be creating it. And the person waiting for her wasn't just me. If you think this couldn't happen to you, stay subscribed. That's how people like her win. The hardest part wasn't what she was doing. It was how easily people accepted it. When someone tells a lie with enough calm, it doesn't sound like a lie anymore. It sounds like information. And once information settles into people's minds, it's almost impossible to pull out without tearing something with it. I learned that the hard way. 2 weeks after I left my house, I got a call I'd been dreading. Not from family, from a professional. His voice was polite, measured, the kind of tone people use when they're already standing on one side of a decision. He said he'd been asked to check in on me. Nothing official yet, just concern, just making sure I was safe. Safe. That word again. I asked who requested the call. There was a pause. Then he said her name. I felt something drop in my chest, not fear, not anger, but urgency. Because this wasn't gossip anymore. This was paperwork starting to move. I met him the next morning in a small office that smelled like coffee and disinfectant. He didn't accuse me of anything. He didn't have to. His questions did that work for him. Did I know what day it was? Did I remember why I was there? Could I explain why I'd left my home so suddenly? I answered everything calmly, clearly, correctly, but I could tell it didn't matter as much as it should have. He wasn't there to listen. He was there to observe. And observation without context is dangerous, especially when someone else is controlling the narrative. When I left that office, I realized something that made my hands shake for the first time since this began. If she escalated one more step, I wouldn't be defending myself anymore. I'd be reacting. And once you're reacting, you're already losing. That night, I checked the cameras again. She was back in my house. She stayed nearly 40 minutes this time, 40 minutes moving through my life like she was taking inventory. She opened drawers more aggressively now, less care, more confidence. She assumed she had time. That assumption almost cost me everything, because halfway through her visit, the feed cut out. Just gone. No warning, no signal loss, no glitch. Black screen. My stomach tightened. She hadn't just gotten comfortable, she'd gotten smarter. If you're watching this and thinking this is where it all falls apart, you're not wrong. For about 12 hours, I thought I'd miscalculated everything. I drove past the house at dawn, keeping my distance. Nothing looked disturbed. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry. But when I checked the camera system later that day, my suspicion was confirmed. The power supply had been unplugged. Carefully, deliberately. She'd noticed the cameras, and she hadn't panicked. She'd adapted. That's the closest I came to losing, because once she knew she was being watched, she could change everything. She could deny. She could destroy evidence. She could flip the story and claim I'd installed cameras because I was paranoid. If that argument landed, it wouldn't matter how many recordings I had. I'd look obsessed, unstable, exactly what she'd been suggesting all along. I sat alone that night, staring at the wall, asking myself the question I'd been avoiding. Had I waited too long? If you've ever been in a position where timing is everything, you know that feeling. The sense that you've crossed some invisible line and now the outcome isn't fully yours anymore. That's where I was, right on the edge. Here's the part that surprised me. She didn't stop coming. Even after discovering the cameras, she returned 2 nights later. Different approach this time. She didn't touch drawers, didn't photograph documents, didn't linger. She stood in the center of the living room and spoke, out loud, to no one. She said, "I know you're watching. This isn't healthy." That sentence was meant for the footage. She wanted it recorded. She wanted proof that I was obsessed. That was her counterattack. And for a moment, it worked. Because when I played that clip back, even I felt doubt creep in. If you showed you that video without context, what would you think? That's how close she came. If this part makes you angry, stay with me, subscribe. The most dangerous moves happen right before people overplay their hand. I almost confronted her again. Almost. Instead, I did something smarter. I stopped recording. Not completely. I changed how. I repositioned cameras, reduced coverage, let blind spots exist on purpose. I wanted her to think she'd won that round, and she did. At least that's what she told people. The phone calls intensified. The concern became firmer. Maybe it's time to intervene. We can't ignore the signs anymore. We just want what's best for him. Best. That word is always the most dangerous because it justifies anything. Then came the document. Not a court order, not yet. A recommendation. Official enough to scare people, vague enough to be abused. I read it slowly, twice, feeling the walls close in. This was the near end. One more push from her, and the decision wouldn't be mine anymore. I had one chance to change the direction of this story. One. And it couldn't come from me. That's when I reached out to someone who didn't know me as an old man. Someone who knew patterns. Someone who didn't care about narratives, only outcomes. If you've ever wondered when to stop handling something alone, this is it.
Subscribe. Knowing when to ask for help is the difference between surviving and disappearing. The next time she entered my house, she thought she was regaining control. She wasn't, because while she'd been perfecting her story, I'd just introduced a new character into it, and he didn't believe in coincidences. The next chapter is where the power finally shifts, and she starts to panic.
The man I called didn't ask how I was feeling. That's how I knew I'd chosen the right person. He didn't ask if I was scared, didn't ask if I was confused, didn't even ask why I thought something was wrong. He asked one question. How many times did she enter the house? When I told him, slowly, clearly, there was a pause on the line. Then he said, "That's not concern, that's rehearsal." We met 2 days later in a place she'd never think to look, a quiet public library, mid-morning, when the building was full enough to disappear in, but quiet enough to talk. He was retired, no uniform, no badge on display, just a legal pad, a pen, and eyes that didn't blink when you spoke. He listened without interrupting while I laid everything out. The entries, the rearranged documents, the narrative she was spreading, the recommendation letter that nearly erased me. When I finished, he didn't react the way most people do. He didn't look shocked. He looked familiar. "I've seen this before," he said. "Not exactly like this, but close enough." That was the moment I knew this wasn't just my problem anymore. He didn't start by looking at the footage. He started by asking about her behavior outside the house, how she spoke about me, who she spoke to first, what words she used. When I told him she kept saying confused, he nodded. "That's intentional," he said. "It's soft enough to sound harmless, strong enough to stick." Then he said something that shifted the ground beneath me. "She's not trying to prove you're incapable," he said. "She's trying to prove she's necessary." That distinction matters, because once someone positions themselves as necessary, everything else becomes justification. Breaking in, managing finances, speaking for you, deciding for you. He finally watched the footage, not casually, not emotionally, frame by frame. He paused on the clip where she waved at the camera. "That's arrogance," he said. "She thought the audience was gone." Then he paused on another moment, one I'd overlooked. She'd returned an envelope to my desk, but not the same envelope. She'd swapped it. Same color, same size, different contents. My chest tightened. "She's not just documenting," he said. "She's testing replacement." Replacement. That word hit harder than anything else so far, because replacement means preparation for removal. If you're still watching, understand this. People don't practice unless they plan to perform. He asked me a question I wasn't ready for. "Do you know how many properties are connected to her name?" I didn't. Neither did my son, apparently. The investigator had already done some digging. Quietly. Nothing illegal, just public records. Patterns. Cross-references. There were others. Not identical cases, but familiar ones. Older individuals, gradual concern, increasing involvement, and eventually, control. "She doesn't do this often," he said, "but when she does it clean." I felt something settle in my stomach. This wasn't opportunistic, it was selective, which meant I hadn't been targeted because I was weak, I'd been targeted because I was stable. If that realization scares you, it should. Subscribe. People like her don't look for chaos, they create it slowly. From that moment on, nothing I did was accidental. Every move had purpose. We didn't confront her, didn't warn her, didn't let the story change suddenly. Instead, we let her continue. Because the most dangerous thing you can do to someone building a narrative is let them overbuild it. She kept entering the house, but something changed. She wasn't relaxed anymore. She started checking corners, pausing longer, standing still, listening. She sensed something. That's the problem with people who rely on control. They panic when they feel it slipping. She started making mistakes, small ones at first.
She stayed too long. She made calls inside the house. She referenced things she shouldn't have known. And then she did something reckless. She brought someone with her. Not a friend, not family, a stranger. They walked through my home together, discussing it like a project. I watched from a distance as the investigator recorded everything, not just the footage, the behavior, the intent. That was the moment the case stopped being theoretical. That was the moment it became inevitable. She still thought she was winning. That's the part that still amazes me. She told people I refused help, that I was isolating, that she was doing everything she could. And people believed her, because belief isn't built on truth, it's built on repetition. But repetition has a flaw. Eventually, it creates evidence. The investigator warned me not to celebrate yet. He said, she hasn't realized she's exposed, which means she'll escalate. He was right. 2 nights later, she entered the house again. Different energy this time. She didn't browse, she searched. Drawers yanked open, files scattered, patience gone. She was looking for something, and whatever it was, she didn't find it. That's when she snapped. She kicked a chair, slapped a drawer shut, spoke under her breath, angry now, not controlled. That anger was new, and it was dangerous, because angry people rush. If you stayed with me this far, here's a warning worth hearing. When someone realizes they're losing control, they stop caring how they look. That's when the mask slips. We knew what came next. Confrontation. Not mine, hers. And sure enough, the next morning, my phone rang. It was her. First call since I'd disappeared. Her voice was tight, controlled, but strained. We need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Out of hand, as if I'd done something. I told her nothing, I just listened. And when she finished speaking, I did something she didn't expect. I agreed. Because the next move required her confidence, and confidence always brings people back to the scene. She thought the meeting would be about control, about fixing the story, about putting me back in my place. She didn't know it yet, but she'd just stepped into the only place left where the truth couldn't be managed. If you think control can't flip this fast, stay subscribed. This isn't over.
She chose the place. That should have been my first warning. A quiet cafe near the edge of town. Neutral territory. Windows everywhere. People close enough to witness, not close enough to hear. The kind of place where confrontation looks bad and calm looks credible. She arrived early. I could tell because when I walked in, she was already watching the door. Not nervously, strategically. She stood to greet me, wearing concern like a costume, the same soft smile, the same careful eyes. "You look tired," she said. "I've been worried." That word again, worried. She wanted witnesses to hear it. We sat. She spoke first. She always did. She didn't accuse me of anything. That's the trick people like her use. Instead, she framed everything as help. She talked about stress, about aging, about how change is hard when you don't realize you need it. She said people had been asking questions, concerned people, good people. She leaned forward and lowered her voice like she was letting me in on a secret. "I've been protecting you," she said, "but it's getting harder." Protecting me? From what? Myself. If you've never had someone explain your own life to you like you weren't in it, you don't understand how destabilizing it is. She spoke calmly, smoothly. Every sentence had an escape hatch. Nothing she said could be proven false. Nothing she said could be proven true either. And that's where the danger lived. I didn't interrupt. I let her talk. That made her bolder. She mentioned the recommendation letter, casually, as if it had nothing to do with her. "People are just trying to make sure you're safe," she said. "You understand that, right?" I nodded, and that almost broke me, because for a moment, just a moment, I understood exactly how this ends for most people. Not with a fight, with agreement, with exhaustion, with the quiet decision to stop pushing back because pushing back makes you look worse. If this part feels heavy, stay with me. Subscribe. Most people give up right here. Then she made her mistake. She slid a folder across the table. "Just something to look over," she said.
Inside were documents I'd never seen before, plans, proposals, outlines, not finalized, but drafted, about my life, living arrangements, financial oversight, decision authority. Her name appeared everywhere. Mine barely did. That's when I felt it. Not anger. Clarity. She wasn't waiting for approval. She was waiting for surrender. I asked her one question. Why now? She hesitated, just long enough. Because you're isolating, and isolation is dangerous. I leaned back and studied her face. She believed this. Not the words, but the outcome. She believed she deserved control. That belief is unshakable in people like her. It's also exploitable. I told her I needed time. She nodded, gracious. I figured you would, she said. We can take this slow. Slow. She thought she had weeks. She had hours. Here's what she didn't know. The investigator was sitting 3 tables away, newspaper up, coffee untouched, watching, listening, recording. Not just her words, her posture, her tone, her dominance. Everything she thought looked reasonable. Everything that would later look calculated. I stood to leave. She reached out and touched my arm. Public, gentle, possessive. Please, she said softly, let me help you. That touch did something unexpected. It almost worked. For the first time since this began, I felt old. Not in my body, in my spirit. Tired. If you've ever wondered how people lose control without realizing it, this is how. One reasonable conversation at a time. That night, everything accelerated. The recommendation turned into a request. The request turned into a schedule. People stopped asking how I was. They started asking when I'd comply. And then came the call I wasn't prepared for. My son. His voice was tight, frustrated, concerned. She'd spoken to him. Not angrily, not dramatically, lovingly. She told him she was scared, that she didn't know what else to do, that I was pushing everyone away. That hurt more than anything she'd done so far, because she didn't just weaponize concern, she weaponized family. If this part makes your chest tighten, subscribe. Stories like this spread because silence protects the wrong people. I tried to explain, carefully, slowly. I told him about the entries, the footage, the manipulation. There was a pause on the line. Then he said something that nearly ended this story. She's just trying to help, he said. Why can't you see that? That sentence is where most people lose, because once family doubts you, authority follows, and authority doesn't reverse easily. I hung up shaking, not with fear, with the understanding that I was running out of time. That's when the investigator gave me the worst news yet. He filed a formal petition, he said. Not approved yet, but it's moving. Moving. Paperwork doesn't rush, it advances. And once it advances far enough, stopping it requires proof that doesn't exist yet. I asked him the question I'd been avoiding. What if we're too late? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, then we force her to make a mistake. That plan scared me, because it meant giving her what she wanted. Access, control, another chance. If you're still watching, ask yourself this. Would you risk everything to expose the truth, or would you settle for losing quietly? We decided to let her think she'd won. I agreed, on record, to consider the arrangements. I stopped resisting publicly. I went silent again, and she relaxed. That was the signal we were waiting for, because the moment people think they've secured control, they stop hiding how they use it. 2 nights later, she returned to my house. Not cautiously, not quietly. She brought documents, she brought confidence, and she brought someone who should never have been there. That third person changed everything, and what he said inside my home became the key to destroying her entire plan. If you think compliance always keeps you safe, stay subscribed. This gets darker.
She didn't knock. She never did. At 2:07 in the morning, the door opened the same way it always had. Slow, confident, unafraid. But this time, she wasn't alone. I watched from a distance as she stepped inside my house, carrying a folder thick enough to bend in the middle. Behind her came a man I didn't recognize. Mid-40s, clean jacket, the kind of posture that said he'd done this before. He looked around like he was already planning changes. That's when I knew. This wasn't about helping me anymore. This was about transferring me. They didn't whisper. That's what stunned me most. They spoke openly, casually, like my house was already empty of meaning. She gestured toward the living room. This is the space I was telling you about. Telling you. The man nodded. Good layout. Quiet street. That helps. Helps with what? They walked through my home together. He opened doors, took notes, asked questions. How cooperative is he? The man asked. She didn't hesitate. Confused, but manageable. That word again. Manageable. If you're still watching, understand this. No one uses that word unless they think someone belongs to them. They sat at my kitchen table. My table. The man opened his folder. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Not proposals this time. Contracts, draft guardianship agreements, asset management outlines, real estate contingencies. My name appeared only where signatures would eventually go. Her name was everywhere else. I felt something settle in my chest. Not panic, not rage, but certainty. This was no longer about concern. This was commerce. Here's the part that broke the case wide open. The investigator beside me didn't move. He just leaned forward slightly and whispered, "That man isn't a consultant." He was right. The man wasn't there to help manage my life. He was there to profit from it. Public records confirmed it within hours. He specialized in acquiring properties through assisted transitions, guardianship-adjacent deals, fast transfers, quiet sales. Not illegal, just predatory. And my house, paid off, well-located, unencumbered, was exactly the kind of asset they targeted. I wasn't being helped. I was being harvested. If this makes your skin crawl, subscribe. Most people never realize this world exists until it's too late. They stayed nearly an hour, long enough to map out rooms, long enough to discuss timelines, long enough to say things they assumed no one would ever hear. When they finally left, she locked the door behind them carefully, like she was closing a chapter. She didn't know she'd just written the ending instead. We didn't act immediately. That's important, because the worst thing you can do when someone exposes themselves is rush. Instead, we documented everything. The language, the phrasing, the coordination. It wasn't just her anymore. It was a network, and networks leave trails. The next morning, something unexpected happened. She overplayed her hand. She called me, not to threaten, to reassure. I know this has been overwhelming, but things are moving in a good direction. Moving. Again. She told me arrangements were being made, that I wouldn't have to worry about details anymore. That line told me everything. She thought the decision was already made. She thought I was done resisting. She was wrong. That afternoon, the investigator made his call. Not to police, not yet. To a compliance office. Then to a legal review board. Then to someone who specialized in patterns, not people. Because what they'd just done, bringing a third party into my home without authorization, crossed a line they couldn't walk back from. Not morally, legally. If you've stayed with me this long, here's something worth remembering. Predators rely on gray areas. The moment something turns black and white, they panic. And panic is exactly what she did next. She started calling, not calmly anymore, frequently, demanding updates, asking questions she shouldn't have known to ask. She sensed the shift. The problem was, she didn't know where it came from. That's the worst kind of fear. 2 days later, the man came back alone. That was a mistake. He walked through the house faster this time, less confidence, more urgency. He took photos, checked locks, measured windows. When he left, he made one call. I caught the end of it. "We need to move faster," he said. "Something's off." He was right. But it wasn't the house.
It was the timeline. The investigator turned to me that night and said, "She's going to try to finalize control." That meant one thing. She was going to force a confrontation, publicly, with witnesses, with authority. She believed pressure would finish what manipulation started, and she chose the worst possible place to do it. If this story is making you uneasy, stay subscribed. The most dangerous people are the ones who think they're almost done. 3 days later, I received an official notice, a hearing, mandatory attendance, time, date, location. She'd escalated to the final step. She thought it would end with paperwork. She didn't know what evidence was already waiting for that room, and she had no idea who would be sitting behind her when it began. The next chapter is where everything she built collapses in public. If you think silence always protects you, subscribe. The truth only matters when it's timed right.
The notice came in an envelope that felt heavier than it should have. A hearing. Mandatory attendance. Time, date, location. No accusations on paper, no conclusions either, just neutral language designed to sound reasonable. That's how they get you into the room. She arrived early. Of course she did. When I walked in, she was already seated at the table, posture straight, hands folded neatly, calm, prepared, dressed like someone who expected to be believed. She didn't look at me right away. She waited until I took my seat. Then she smiled, not warmly, confidently, like this was the end of a process she'd already rehearsed. The room filled slowly. Officials, reviewers, a few people whose job titles were vague on purpose. And then, quietly, 2 people took seats behind her. She didn't notice. Not at first. She was too busy setting the tone. She spoke before anyone asked her to. Not aggressively, not emotionally. Concerned. She talked about my recent withdrawal, about changes she'd observed, about how hard it is to watch someone you care about decline. She used all the right words, measured, gentle, reasonable. If you'd walked in cold, you would have believed her. That's the dangerous part. When it was my turn to speak, the room shifted slightly. Not hostility, expectation. I could feel it. This was the moment where people decide if you're credible or not. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue her points. I did something else. I asked permission to show something. She glanced at me, puzzled but unconcerned. She thought this was where I embarrassed myself. That belief would cost her everything. The screen lit up. Time-stamped footage, clear, stable, uninterrupted. The first clip showed her unlocking my door late at night. The room went quiet. The second clip showed her inside my bedroom opening drawers. She shifted in her seat. The third clip showed her waving at the camera. Someone behind the table leaned forward. She turned slightly, trying to maintain composure. Then the audio played. Her voice, clear, unmistakable, calling me confused, calling me manageable, discussing timelines. That's when the first crack appeared. Not panic, calculation. She realized she'd underestimated something. She tried to interrupt, politely. "I think this is being taken out of context," she said. That was the wrong move, because the next clip removed all context. It showed her sitting at my kitchen table with him, the third person, discussing contracts, discussing control, discussing my absence as if it were permanent. The room changed, not emotionally, procedurally. Pens started moving, notes were taken, questions were written down that hadn't existed 5 minutes earlier. If you've ever wondered what real power looks like, it's not shouting, it's documentation being reviewed in silence. She spoke faster now, still calm, but compressed. She explained she'd only been exploring options, that she'd never finalized anything, that she'd been acting in my best interest. Then one of the people behind the table asked a simple question. Why wasn't he present for these discussions? She opened her mouth, closed it,
then said he wasn't in a place to participate. That sentence ended it, because it didn't sound like concern, it sounded like authority, and she hadn't been granted any. She looked back then, finally noticed who was sitting behind her. Her posture stiffened. The investigator met her eyes, didn't smile, didn't nod, just watched. That's when the color drained from her face. She recognized him, I could tell. You don't forget someone who understands patterns better than excuses. If this moment feels satisfying, pause and subscribe. Stories like this don't end in private, they end where people can't lie. The hearing didn't end in handcuffs. That's not how these things work. It ended with delays, reviews, referrals, which is worse for someone like her, because delays mean scrutiny, and scrutiny unravels everything built on confidence. She left the room quickly, didn't look at me, didn't speak, just walked out like gravity had changed. Outside, she finally turned. Her voice wasn't controlled anymore. "You planned this," she said. Not a question, an accusation. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth doesn't argue. She stepped closer, lowered her voice. "You don't know what you've started," she said. That line wasn't a threat, it was fear. If you're still watching, understand this. People don't threaten when they're in control. They warn when they're losing it. What happened next surprised me. My son arrived. He'd been called, by her, by someone else, by the process. He looked between us, confused in a way I recognized. For the first time, he didn't know who to believe. That hesitation mattered, because doubt breaks spells. She spoke quickly, trying to recover ground, explaining, framing, minimizing. I said nothing. The footage had already spoken. Silence was louder now. That night, the phone didn't stop ringing. Compliance offices, review boards, people who hadn't returned my calls weeks earlier. The story had shifted. Not in my favor yet, but away from her. And once momentum changes direction, it doesn't need help. If this shift feels sudden, subscribe. Collapse always looks fast from the outside. Here's the part you don't see in movies. There was no relief, no celebration, just exhaustion. Because exposing someone doesn't erase what they tried to do, it just stops them from finishing. And I knew something else was coming. She wasn't done. People like her don't stop when they're caught. They stop when they're cornered. 2 days after the hearing, I received another message. Not from an office, not from a lawyer, from her. Short, unfiltered. "I can fix this," it read, "but you need to cooperate." That message wasn't an apology, it was leverage. And it told me something terrifying. She still believed she had something I wanted. The last chapter is where everything ends, for good. If you think exposure always ends the threat, stay subscribed. This is where it gets final.
Her message sat on my phone for a long time before I answered it. "I can fix this," she wrote, "but you need to cooperate." No apology, no remorse, just terms. That told me everything I needed to know. People who believe they still have leverage never ask for forgiveness. They negotiate. I didn't respond right away. I waited, because waiting had become my advantage. By the time morning came, the world she'd built was already collapsing in ways she couldn't control. The hearing had triggered something she didn't anticipate. Reviews don't stay contained, they spread. The third man, the one she brought into my house, had a history. Not criminal, not obvious, but patterned. Enough that once one agency looked, others followed. Deals paused, accounts flagged, phones went quiet. Predators rely on momentum. When momentum stops, they panic. Her next message came less than an hour later, longer this time. She said there'd been misunderstandings, that she'd gone too far trying to help, that she was willing to step back if we could resolve things privately. Privately. That word used to scare me. Now it sounded desperate. If you're watching this and thinking she finally understood, she didn't. She just realized the room had witnesses now. I agreed to meet her one last time. Not for her, for closure. We met in the same cafe as before, same table, same windows, different balance of power. She arrived late this time, rushed, less polished. Her confidence looked rehearsed and poorly. She didn't sit right away. She started talking, fast. She said she could make the petition disappear, that she knew people, that she'd clean things up if I'd just confirm I was overwhelmed. That word again, overwhelmed. I let her finish. Then I asked her one question. Why did you bring him into my house? She froze. Not long, just long enough. Then she smiled, tight, brittle. You don't understand how these things work, she said. This is what happens when people age. That sentence ended any chance she had left, because it wasn't a slip, it was belief. I slid my phone across the table. On the screen was a single document, filed, accepted, stamped. A formal complaint, with attachments, with timelines, with corroboration. Not just against her, against everyone involved. Her face changed, not dramatically, subtly, like someone realizing the floor beneath them isn't solid anymore. I stood, didn't raise my voice, didn't threaten. I won't be cooperating, and you won't be contacting me again. She reached for my arm, missed. I walked out. That was the last time I spoke to her directly. What followed wasn't cinematic, it was procedural, and that's worse. Her access was revoked, her authority dissolved, her narrative dismantled piece by piece. The third man vanished from records almost overnight, except records don't forget, they wait. Investigations don't announce themselves, they just continue. My son called me 3 days later, not defensive, not certain, quiet. He'd seen the documents, he'd heard things she hadn't told him. He didn't apologize right away, that came later. Instead, he said something that mattered more. I didn't know who to believe, he said. That honesty broke something open. We talked for hours, not about her, about trust, about silence, about how easy it is to let someone else take the wheel when they sound confident. If this part feels familiar, subscribe. Families don't fall apart loudly, they erode quietly. I moved back into my house a week later, changed the locks, upgraded the system, removed every spare key. The house felt different, not violated, reclaimed. I walked through each room slowly, touching the door frames, the counters, the table where she'd once sat and planned my removal. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt ownership. That's a better kind of power. The final notice came by mail. Short, formal, effective. The petition was withdrawn, not denied, withdrawn. That distinction matters, because denial invites appeal, withdrawal admits defeat. I sat at my kitchen table and read it twice. Then I laughed, not loudly, just once. At 2:07 in the morning, weeks later, I woke up naturally. No alarm, no fear. I checked the cameras out of habit. Nothing moved. No doors opened. No shadows crossed the floor. The house was quiet. For the first time in months, it was mine again. People have asked me if I regret how far this went, if I feel bad for her. Here's the truth. I didn't destroy her life. I stopped protecting her from the consequences of her choices. There's a difference. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. Control doesn't always come with force. Sometimes it comes with concern. And the most dangerous people aren't loud. They're patient. I still volunteer. I still garden. I still walk every morning, but I watch more carefully now. Not with fear, with clarity. Because old age doesn't make you weak. It just makes predators think you are. If you're still here at the end of this story, I'll ask you one thing. Would you have walked away quietly? Or would you have waited? If this story stayed with you, subscribe. Silence helps the wrong people. And if you're not subscribing, tell me why. I'm listening.